Charles Starkweather was born on November 29, 1938, in Lincoln, Nebraska. He grew up in a modest and respectable home. His parents provided for their 7 children. He was described as well-behaved, mild-mannered, as were all the Starkweather children. When Starkweather started school, the deadly monster inside him began to grow. Starkweather was born with genu varum and bow legs. He also developed a speech impediment and had undiagnosed myopia, unable to see 20 feet away. He was finally diagnosed when he was 15, but because of all Starkweather's inabilities, he was teased by his classmates and was perceived slow or retarded by his teachers despite his 110 IQ. During his middle school years, he sat in the back of the class, distracted and annoyed to be at school. Although Starkweather's self-esteem shined in gym, and he had developed into a strong, coordinated athlete, which could have been a positive factor in his life. Unfortunately, Starkweather turned into a bully, and anyone who appeared better than him, whether he knew them or not, became a possible victim of Charles Starkweather. In the 9th grade, Starkweather dropped out of high school at the age of 16. He then became infatuated with fast cars and renegade attitudes. Meeting Carol Ann Fugate. When Starkweather was 18, he met 13-year-old Carol Ann Fugate. When he had dropped out of high school, he began working at a Western Union newspaper warehouse, which was located near Carol Ann's middle school, making it easy for both of them to see each other without parents around. When Starkweather taught her how to drive, she wrecked his father's car, which caused tensions between father and son. Charles Starkweather was soon kicked out of his parents' home. He then quit his job at the warehouse and began working for a garbage collector. First murder. On November 30th, 1957, Starkweather went to a service station in Lincoln where he tried to purchase a stuffed toy dog for Fugate. Robert Calvert, the station attendant, refused to accept, and Starkweather left enraged. Starkweather returned to the gas station on December 1st, 1957, at 3 a.m. with his 12-gauge shotgun, in which he initially left in his car. He went in, purchased an item 2 more times, just to return to cover his face and hold Calvert at gunpoint. Calvert was then taken captive to a remote area outside of town. At that point, Calvert struggled and attempted to take control of the situation. Starkweather then overpowered and killed Calvert. Starkweather would later claim that in the aftermath of the murder, he believed that he had transcended his former self to reach a new place of existence, in which he was above and outside the law. He confessed to robbery to Fugate immediately, claiming someone else had killed Calvert, which Fugate did not believe. This makes Starkweather a visionary killer. Bye-bye, Carol Ann's family. On January 21st, 1958, Starkweather decided to visit Carol Ann's home only to get into an argument with her mother and stepfather when he was told to stop seeing her. After hearing that, Starkweather shot her mother in the face and her stepfather in the back of his head, killing them. To quiet the 2.5-year-old Betty Jean, Starkweather repeatedly slashed her throat with a knife, and to be sure no one survived, he went back and stabbed the victims. Later, Carol Ann returned home and saw the scene, then proceeded to help him hide the evidence in the backyard. Then they continued to live in their parents' home for the next 6 days, like honeymoon couple having sex with the remains of her family lying dead and decaying in the backyard. They had put a note on the front door saying the family has the flu and to leave them alone. Friends and family of the Bartletts weren't buying the flu note, and after a lot of resistance of the police, did a physical search of the home and found the bodies, but Starkweather and Fugate had already fled. August Meyer. When Carol Ann and Starkweather set off to get away from the authority, they ran straight to Bennett, Nebraska, where a family friend of Starkweather, August Meyer, lived. While going up the hill that led to Meyer's house, the couple's car got stuck in the snow, and the two of them set off on foot to the old man's house. What had happened during the murder of August Meyer is unclear, but it resulted in Meyer ending up dead from a shotgun blast that removed a large portion of his head. Well fed from food from Meyer's kitchen and loaded up with the dead man's guns and whatever cash they could find, Starkweather and Fugate headed by foot to the nearest main road. If they were to survive, they needed to get their hands on a car. Robert Jensen Jr. and Carol King. 17-year-old Robert Jensen Jr. and 16-year-old Carol King were driving along the road minding their own business and came across Starkweather and Fugate hitchhiking and decided to give them their trust and gave them a ride. Not wasting any time, Starkweather forced Jensen to go to a torn-down school nearby. The terrified couple was led to a storm cellar. There, Starkweather shot Jensen 6 times in the head and King once in the head. When the victims' bodies were discovered by the police, it was noted that King's genitals were slashed several times, but there was no signs that she had been sexually assaulted, so it was believed that it was an act of jealousy performed by Fugate. It was discussed by the couple to head out of state, but for reasons unknown, the couple went back to Lincoln. They even passed Fugate's old home, but when they saw police cars surrounding it, they went to the more affluent side of town, where the rich lived. The Wards and Lillian Fensel. Since Starkweather used to be a trash collector, he was used to the affluent neighborhoods. See Laura Ward and his wife Clara Ward, both 47 years old, owned one of the wealthier homes. Ward was the president of Capital Bridge Company and the Capital Steel Company, which made him one of the wealthiest men in town. On January 30th, 1958, now 8 days into the run, Starkweather and Fugate forced their way into the Ward home, inside where Clara and their live-in maid Lillian Fensel lived. Starkweather told the woman that they had nothing to fear, then ordered Clara to fix breakfast. He enjoyed being waited on by the woman whose trash he had collected so many times. He then tied each of the women up in separate bedrooms and stabbed them to death. Annoyed by Clara's barking poodle, he crushed the dog's neck with his rifle, leaving it alive to suffer. When C. Laura Ward returned home from work, he met with the same fate as his wife and Fensel. Starkweather shot him dead. Starkweather and Fugate loaded up C. Laura Ward's 1956 black Packard with supplies and decided to get out of town. When the Wards' bodies were discovered, the governor put the FBI and the National Guard on the case to stop the fugitives. Merrill Collinson. Merle Collinson was a traveling shoe salesman who pulled to the side of the road to take a nap. He then woke up to Starkweather waking him and demanding to switch cars with him, but Collinson said no. Since Starkweather did not have time to argue, he shot Collinson in the head 9 times. Collinson had a Buick with a push-pedal emergency brake, and Starkweather did not know how to release it. When he stalled out, a passerby offered to help. He was met with a rifle pointed at his face, and two began to wrestle. During the time, Deputy Sheriff William Romer drove up on the pair, and Fugate sprang from the front seat of the Buick, screaming and pointing at Starkweather, saying, "He's killed a man!" Starkweather jumped into the Packard and took off, with Romer following close behind. Romer called for backup as he tried to keep up with Starkweather, who was driving up to 120 miles per hour. More officers joined the chase, and One of them managed to shoot out the back windshield of the Packard. When a piece of the spraying glass cut Starkweather, he thought he had been shot and quickly pulled over and surrendered. In custody. The chase for Starkweather and Fugate was over, but the task of putting together the pieces of who did what had just begun for the authorities. At first, Starkweather said Fugate was not responsible for any of the killings. Fugate insisted she was a victim and not a participant in any crimes. She told investigators that she had been held hostage and that Starkweather threatened to kill her family if she did not go along with his demands. Fugate's hostage story quickly dissolved after she admitted to being present when her family was butchered. Both were charged with first-degree murder, and they were extradited to Nebraska to stand trial. Starkweather and Fugate trial. Charles Starkweather was ultimately only tried for the murder of Robert Jensen. At first, Starkweather testified that he had held Fugate hostage and that she had nothing to do with the murders. Starkweather never stuck to the same story, but finally testified at Fugate's trial that she was a willing companion. Fugate never changed her story from the beginning of the trials. She claimed that she was held against her will and that Starkweather threatened to kill her whole family and claimed that she was unaware that they were already dead. Starkweather was sentenced to death for the murder of Robert Jensen, and Fugate was sentenced to life in prison on November 1st, 1958. She was eventually allowed to be paroled in June 1976 after serving 18 years. Electric chair. On June 25, 1959, Starkweather's execution was on schedule. Earlier in the evening, he had ordered cold cuts for his final meal. He was asked if he wanted to donate his eyes, which he said no, adding, "Why should I? Nobody ever gave me anything." Just after midnight, the 20-year-old spree killer was escorted to the execution chamber with his head shaved and dressed in a prison denim shirt and jeans. When Starkweather was asked if he had any final words, he simply shook his head no. No words send journalists off scribbling in their notebooks. He, like other killers before him, was simply strapped into the electric chair, hit with 2,200 volts of electricity that killed the physicality of the monster, but the horrid memories still live.